we commit them with definite plan, clear plan and execution. We plan to sin or commit this sin. As I'm saying, just imagine one particular sin you actually planned. Let me give you this concrete example. Women, let's say your husband has taken 2 months, has not given you money for food, and you vowed this week, whether he likes it or not, that money must come from him. And you actually plan that when he comes and sleep, you dip your hand into his pocket and remove the money. I hope you understand. That may not be a concrete example, but the fact that there is a plan in committing it. When someone wants to sin now, for example, want to steal, you will plan and observe curiously and seriously to see when the owner of the item is not around. Then he targets that time and go and take what is not given. That is a plan and well executed. Fornication, sometimes we plan to commit it. Adultery, sometimes we plan to commit it. Abortion, we plan to commit it. You discover you are pregnant, or your wife is pregnant, or your girlfriend is pregnant, and you don't have money, and you go consciously looking for money to abort, and you get the money. You begin to think of the better hospital or the better doctor to handle it. Is that not planned? It's planned and executed. So that is why they are called what? Mortal sin, because we plan to commit it and we execute our plan consciously. In Hausa, it is called Zunubin Ganganchi. I hope you understand. I think that word explain it better in Hausa. Zunubin Ganganchi. Conscious and deliberate sin. Whereas venial sin that St. John in 1 John chapter 5 verse 17 describes as that does not lead to sin are those venial, those sins we commit unconsciously. Unconsciously we commit them. Now what happens? We commit most of these sins unconsciously. Then sometimes later we discover that we have committed these sins unconsciously. And instead of being sorry for them, we are happy that thank God I did it. I hope you understand. Let's say you have a picture of committing adultery or fornication with a woman or a man, and possibly you had this thought not when you were not being conscious of the thought, and then later on you discover, oh, by my thought I have committed sin. Instead of you to say I'm sorry, you are happy that at least you have pictured all those things in your mind. That itself becomes what? Mortal sin. That itself becomes mortal sin. And in the Catholic Church, if you are guilty of mortal sin, stay out of confession stay out of communion, till you go for confession. But where you are guilty of venial sin and you have access to communion, you can receive, but you are bound to go for confession after the communion. I hope we know the difference. I repeat, if you are guilty of mortal sin, stay off communion till you go for confession. But if you are guilty of venial sin, you can receive communion if you have access, and then necessarily go for confession after the communion. I hope you understand. And sometimes one Protestant woman has told me one certain time that one thing she likes about Catholic Church is that Catholics accuse themselves of their sins. Catholics accuse themselves of their sins. You know, sometimes when you go for mass, you will discover somebody who is consistent with communion and discover that, oh, this man or this woman did not go for communion today. Not because the priest have said, you don't come for communion, isn't it? But because the person have judged within himself and discovered himself unworthy of receiving the communion and have exempted him or herself from the communion. But the woman says, in the Protestant church, till the pastor says, you, this is the sin you committed, so stay off communion for 1 month. Say they call it huru in Hausa, or punishment, penance. But the Catholics know, and that is one good thing about us. That is one good thing about us. And that is so because we know whom we are receiving. We are receiving. Believe that, like St. Paul says, he who receives him worthily receives what? Eternal life. But he who receives him unworthily receives his condemnation. Now, all I'm bringing you to this is this. This resolution and will. In the seminary, we are taught how to do examination of conscience. Every day before your night prayer, you sit and have a rerun in your mind how your day went. Beginning from the time you woke up, what next did you do? Did you pray? Did you fail to pray? How did you greet your neighbors? How did you approach God? How did you approach your work? And all that. There are sometimes the attitude in which we approach our work sinful. Sometimes we approach our work with laxity, with unseriousness. We do not know that it's sin, because all work is not punishment. Rather, God has allotted that work for you to contribute to his creation. There is no on earth, as far as is good, that is not a contribution to the creation of God. The manner in which you approach your work, dedicatedly or with laxity, proves it sinful or justifiable before God. And when you have this examination of conscience, it is pertinent that we take notes in our spiritual diaries. You can buy a diary and turn it to become your spiritual diary. Take note in your spiritual diary. On this day, this is where I offended God. This is where I offended my neighbor. I make a resolve that tomorrow shall be different. And you go on. And on New Year like this, in New Year like this, it is pertinent that we go through our spiritual diaries and see areas where we have failed in the previous year and make a resolve not to repeat them again. Unfortunately, our society today is not a society of diary. Facebook have taken over everything. In those days where diaries are kept, diaries are known to be highly secretive books, strictly for the owners, isn't it? So that if you open someone's diary, even by mistake, to read the content, you have offended that person. But today, everybody will post everything on Facebook and expect that everybody should read and comment, and will even pick offense that nobody comment on his or her post, isn't it? Somebody just have the opportunity to buy antelope and have cooked it, prepared it, and is eating, and is snapping himself and say, thank God for the gift of this antelope, and is eating and post it on Facebook. He's posting it so that people will see and comment and say, well done, God has uplifted you, or to appreciate those kind of pictures. But people pick offense over such a thing today. That's our world. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, our readings, if you notice, the readings these days, for those who are consistent in following the readings of the Catholic Church and consistent in the morning masses, talks about love and how we ought to love one another, because God has lavished his love seriously upon us. Whatever your resolution will be this year, whatever your resolution will be this year, if you do not resolve to love more, if you do not resolve to love more, you have not started. Are you getting me? Are you getting me? Am I speaking to somebody? If you do not resolve to love more, you have no resolution. And God has taught us how to love. Love him with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, with all your soul. And love your neighbor how? As yourself. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Simply do this and you become perfect. And that is what the readings of today spelled out for us. Love is brought, or life is brought to perfection through what? Through love. Life is brought to perfection through love. Nothing more, nothing less. And it tells us that it is only when we love perfectly that we will be able to conquer the fear of judgment. Like it or not, there are moments in our life where we sit and think whether when we die we are going to heaven or hell. Don't you think so every day in your life? What will help you conquer that fear? Simply is love. It is love that will help you conquer that. And that's why the readings today says, it is in this love that we conquer the fear of judgment. For there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out every fear. Perfect love casts out every fear. Let our resolution this year be to love more. Let love take the lead in our lives in 2020. Let love take the lead in our lives in 2020, so that by the end we will be able to cast out every fear that stands against our path to salvation. May the good Lord bless his words in our hearts.